Hey guys, hope everyone's well. I've been recording some metal recently. And can't help but notice that as a guitarist and not a bass player, it's difficult to get the right kind of bass sound for that kind of track. So this is a bit of an experiment video. In this video I'm going to run my bass through my guitar pedal board and I'm going to see what I can use on there to get the kind of bass tone that I'm after. And I'm not quite sure what to expect, so let's just get right into it. This is my bass. This is a Mexican Deluxe P-Bass Active, I think. Fender brought them out in 2016-15 with Rosewood boards. They've all got Palfero now, but this is an older one, so it's got Rosewood. Sounds great. And this is how it sounds going into a perfectly clean amp. This is into my Ampeg Micro VR. I've got the active circuit engaged, but everything's on 5. Let's see how it sounds. Which is a nice sound, right? But it's not quite the sound that I'm after. I want something that's a bit dark glassy. If you know about dark glass pedals, they've got this really signature mid-heavy, gritty, grunty, growly distortion overdrive kind of thing. And that's what I'm after. I want something that's got enough grit that it can kind of cut through a mix if you want it to. But if not, you can just kind of dial the mids back and it sits there as sort of a gritty block. I've been listening to a lot of things with bass that's got this big clean block of bass that's just a low end, just kind of support for everything. That's not really what I'm after. I want something a bit more dynamic and a bit more on edge, if that makes sense. I'm going to start with the pedal that I least think is going to get me the sound I'm after and then move towards what I most think is going to do that. So my first guess was the Electro Harmonix Russian Big Muff Reissue. I've done a video on this already, so I'm not going to talk about it too much again. However, you remember in that video that I did, I mentioned it was really popular among bassists for being really mid-heavy and for being essentially a wall of sound kind of thing. So I want to find out how it sounds on bass, because I didn't try it for that demo, stupidly, and whether it's right for me. I'm not so sure about this one, but I think it'll sound cool anyway. So let's find out. Appropriate for the kind of metal that I was demonstrating earlier, but I'm still curious what happens if I mess with the active EQ on this bass a little bit into the Russian Big Muff Reissue to see how it sounds with that. So I'm going to try dialing the mids back a little bit and see if that does anything. Seems to make it sit a bit further back in the mix. That's kind of one of the things that I wanted out of my metal bass sound. I want it to be able to come out at the parts where it needs to, but also be able to sit back in a mix. And I'm aware that that's quite a difficult thing to do with essentially just one bit of gear. That gets pretty close actually, but it's not quite what I'm after. I think it's too fuzz-like, and I want something a bit, not softer, but more overdrive-like, with slightly less of a square wave on the audio pattern. My next best guess, which I think is going to get me a bit closer, is using my MXR GTOD, which is on my pedal board, as my kind of lead solo boost thing for when I'm using guitars. I'm running my bass through that. I'm essentially treating it as a tube screamer kind of thing. I have listened to a lot of bands, and I know a lot of bands that use tube screamers in their bass chain to get that kind of extra grit and growl. And I want to know, is it kind of comparable to anything else, or is it its own beast? If it's its own beast, that's not a problem at all. If it sounds great, it sounds great. But is it what I'm after, or is it different and not really working? I'm not sure yet, but I've got higher hopes than with the Big Muff. Let's find out. I think this will be a bit better. Already that's a lot closer. I really like that. It's got that kind of mid bump, but still got enough low end that it could hold a mix down if it really wants to. I find that quite exciting, really. What happens if I scoop the mids back on this one? Does it still cut through, or does it sit back a bit better? I think it'll sit back, but I'm not sure how much. I don't know if it'll ruin it. It seems like by sucking the mids out, it takes away all of the character of that sound. It just makes it this kind of block again. And a block is cool, but a block is not what I'm after right now. So what happens if I just play with that mid slider, or knob, whatever. I'll play with that mid control and we'll see at what point it loses it, and at that point if it sits far enough back or if it needs to come out a bit more. Sucking all the mids out is taking away all the character of that sound. I think it needs those mids to kind of cut through the way it does, but also have enough definition that you can kind of make out what it's playing. I'm aware that if you suck the mids out too much, it'll sit back in a mix, it won't come forward as much. But it also takes away being able to hear what note is being played. And that's something that I want to be able to hear. And this is the bit where I tell you where I've been an absolute contrarian. I've seen lots of other people on YouTube who, to get their bass sound, have essentially taken a clean, almost DI bass signal, played that, and underneath it I've duplicated something that is so fuzzy you can't make out what note is being played, but because it's kind of fuzzy and distorted, adds to the depth of the bass sound. I've never tried that before, and would kind of like to. Unfortunately, I can't really listen back in real time to a duplicated DI track to work out if that's what I want and commentate on it, because that would be a bit difficult. But I do have this Deluxe Bass Big Muff, which has a direct out on it. From here, I can just take another mic cable out of this, go straight into my DAW, and mix it with a clean signal out of this direct out. I'm not sure how it'll sound. Let's plug it in and find out. I'm gonna have to unplug this mic, so not gonna talk for a little bit. You might love that. it's just not right for me. It's how people describe using a tube screamer in front of a clean amp. Particularly people like Pete Thorne takes really real issue with this, where he kind of says that it sounds like there's this layer of clean and then this layer of what is essentially just kind of fluff on top of it. It doesn't sound right and they don't blend together very well. And surely if you're using this kind of dual routing setup, you want them to blend well. But I'm not happy with that. It's not right. I think the closest I've found is using that GTOD. And I'm not sure I'm surprised by that, but I didn't think it would sound as close as it does to me to something like a Dark Glass, where they've got this really distinct mid punch, and I like that, but it's also got enough of a low cut that it doesn't just rumble through everything. I really like how it sounds just even... It's got something, I can't describe what, but I really like it. I think that's the sound that I'm after. Essentially a guitar sound, but lower. And that's what running, at least in my circumstances, a GTOD, and yours might be a tube screamer, whatever, does. It blends the low end of the bass and the kind of mids and highs of the guitar together to create not really two separate sounds, but one massive sound. They become, instead of two separate things, one huge block that takes up the entire of the rhythm section. At least to me, that seems easier to mix and potentially more cohesive in a mix, because all you've got to do is make the rhythm section as one piece work. That's a bonus as well, but not quite what I was out to achieve. This is a bit of slightly different advice, but I think it's just as worthwhile. If you're a guitarist and you want to track bass, try running your bass through your pedal board that you have for guitar first, before running out to get any kind of bass gear. Obviously you need the right kind of amp, so a bass amp is usually a good bet. But don't worry about kind of bass pedals. Try your guitar pedals first. It might be what you're after. For me, thankfully it is. For other people it might not be, in which case, yeah, then, go out, get loads of bass gear if you want to. Make it sound really cool. If you can save that extra step and just kind of get there quicker, at least to me it will help the creative process and it will make it so much easier to track things if you just kind of run them all through the same thing. I know it seems really counterintuitive when most of my videos are about gear, but if you're a guitarist and would like to track bass, obviously get yourself a good bass, get yourself a good bass amp, and cab if you want to mic it live. If not, Torpedo is a fantastic solution, that's what I use. And from there, run your bass through your guitar effects chain, see what you can get out of that, and whether it sounds good for what you want to do. Thankfully for me it does. If it doesn't for you and you've tried it, then by all means go get loads of bass pedals and build up a second rig and make it cool as hell. For me it just seems so much easier to get that same sound, or at least a sound that's very close to it, without getting any extra gear. It will speed up my creative process quite a lot. So I'll just be able to have an idea and just kind of hash it out, and it'll be done rather than sitting in front of a separate pedal board that I'm a little bit confused and intimidated by, twisting dials until I get something kind of like what I'm after when I'm 99% there on my guitar chain without touching anything. That was not the lesson that I intended to give when I started making this video, but it's a better idea than the one I started with, so I'll stick with it. As always, thank you for getting this far into the video. I really appreciate you sitting through my ramblings. If you're a guitarist, I hope this was helpful. If you're a bassist, I hope I at least said something of worth if I wasn't helpful, because you know far more about bass than I do. If you enjoyed this video, drop me a like. If you've got any suggestions yourself on how to get a good bass sound as a guitarist, leave me a comment, because I'd love to try a couple more methods to see if there's anything more accurate, or at least more what I'm kind of after. If you didn't like it, leave me a dislike, but also please tell me why. I would love to hear, criticism so I can improve from it and make things that you want to watch. If you really liked it, please subscribe. There will be more coming soon. Thank you again, and I will see you very soon.